So welcome back to today's video. Today is Sunday, August 10th, 2025, and today we are going to be talking about the generic ballot in the 2026 midterm elections as Democrats look to a possibility of a Democratic wave year in the next November election cycle. A lot of things that we've been talking about are how well Democrats are doing, how well Republicans are doing, who's up in which battleground state and which battleground district, but ultimately speaking, what is found to be the most interesting part of this all, and we talk about this constantly, is the difference in approval versus Democratic support across this country. Now, you've seen the headlines. Democrats are more unpopular than ever in terms of the way the American public views them, and that is true. It is factual. Democrats are in a very bad position when it comes down to how the American public largely views them. Do they like Democrats? Do they like Republicans? And ultimately speaking, what it has shown is that voters are largely upset with the current state and day of the Democratic Party, and you can find it here. About 29% of Kamala Harris voters in the last election view the Democratic Party unfavorably. 65% of independents view the Democratic Party unfavorably. A net 39% negative for Democrats amongst the independents, and even amongst Democratic Party voters, not just including Harris voters, that include some independents, and in some cases some Republicans, but amongst the Democratic Party, just 83% of their own party view their political party as favorable, 16%. And to put that just into simple terms, you're talking about nearly 1 in 7 or around 1 in 6 voters in the Democratic Party, registered Democrats, say, I view the Democratic Party unfavorably. 56% of adults do too. But in the same survey, and this has been a constant, in the same survey and across the board, voters who say they disapprove of the Democratic Party may still vote for the Democratic Party and are suggested that they will in this cycle. In the same electorate that says they have a negative view of the Democratic Party by 20 points, prefers them over Republicans by a massive 7 points. It should be no surprise that by an 86% delta positive for the Democrats, Harris voters back Democrats to Republicans. Democrats back it 95-1, but it is independents that really get me. That 25% say they want to vote for the Republican, but 45% right now say they want to vote for the Democrat in the 2026 elections. And this YouGov poll that just came out has now only added and expanded to the Democratic Party's climbing lead in the generic ballot. At the beginning of this second Trump admin, Donald Trump and the Republican Party were at their highest points that they've seen of this election cycle. 49% of Republicans on average voters said they preferred Republicans to Democrats in Congress. That's 49% to the Democrats being at a low of 44%. And it took a while for Democrats to claim that lead over Republicans compared to 2017 when they started with the lead and never lost it through the 2018 cycle. 49-44 was a pretty deafening lead for the GOP. But it reminded me a lot of when, traditionally speaking, when political parties win elections and they get inaugurated, their honeymoons, save Trump won, often do result in generic ballot leads for their political party. We saw it with Biden. We saw it with Obama. We saw it with, now Trump the second time. We didn't see it with Trump 1, but we saw it with George W. Bush. In every election and in every cycle, besides Donald Trump's presidency from 2017 to 2021, we had seen this be the case. Seeing it again in 2025 felt a little jarring, I think, for a lot of Democrats, but largely in line with the traditional path of normal electoral politics. And obviously, we're in a new normal. Everything feels different. But in terms of the results here, the numbers were a lot better for the GOP right when Donald Trump was inaugurated. And as the months went on, Democrats started to climb. But the disaffection amongst the base with their own political party is evident. Voters are not thrilled with the Democratic Party today, and they don't like them to the degree that they did 8 years ago, or arguably even 4 years ago, or arguably even a year ago. But it doesn't mean that they won't win those voters. What I have found to be fascinating about these new data points, and especially very reputable ones, I mean, the generic ballot is leading and increasing for Democrats. A month ago, this was a 2-point lead, and it is now a 4-point lead. And based on the pathway of generic ballot movement over the years, there is a chance the Democrats end up with a near identical margin to what they were in 2018, because right now, they're only about 4 points off where they were in the 2018 midterms. And while Democrats had maintained that lead from a very long time, very early on, it isn't outside the realm of possibility that Democrats reclaimed that by the time you reach this point. August 10th, 2017, Democrats led by about 9. By the time you reached Election Day, led by about 7, there's certainly room for growth here for the Democratic Party as they are moving in an upward direction, in contrast to 2017, 2018, when it went on a slightly down direction by the overall trend line. But getting back to the point here, in terms of key demographics, you'll find the Democrats are still doing better than they did in 2024. Even voters that backed Trump in 2024, only 77% of them are set on voting for the Republican in the election. 6% say they'd back the Democrat, and 13% right now are up in the air. Up in the air. And of those who didn't vote in the 2024 election, this is really what could harm the Republican Party. 37% of those who did not vote in the 2024 election say they're voting for Democrats. 24% say they're voting for Republicans. That's a 13-point lead for Democrats. And that means that they are inspiring voters who weren't a part of the calculus and weren't part of the electorate in the last cycle. They are still voting for the Democratic Party more than they are voting for the Republican Party. And it is these same voters that disapprove again of the job that Democrats are doing and just say that they viewed the Democratic Party unfavorably. They still prefer them to Republicans in Congress. Because I think that the whole talking point that has been really circulated is that because Democrats are unpopular, it makes it impossible for them to win. But that simply is not the case. That is furthest from the truth. Because if you look back at years past, you'll find that voters in some cases haven't been thrilled with the political party that would inevitably win the midterm elections. In 2010, I'm not sure if we'll find this here, but in terms of the data points that we get from places like Gallup, you'll find that voters, weren't really thrilled by the Republican Party in terms of overall favorability, but it was still enough that it helped them do well to win the election. They weren't saying we adore the GOP, and obviously by 2012, Republicans lost that election. But it was the data that suggested that their own base was unhappy, thus the Tea Party movement came in, replaced a lot of them in the 2010 midterms, then they became more happy with their party. Something similar might be happening this time. Because while Democrats might be upset with the national party figures, they will still vote for their political party. And while a lot of independents might say, I don't agree with all the decisions and all of the, optics of the Democratic Party, but I will still vote for the Democratic Party, is when Republicans find themselves in trouble. Because it is clear the numbers are only increasing for the Democratic Party, and this is something that needs to be understood. A lot of young voters, for instance, 18 to 29, this demographic that prefers Democrats to Republicans by 21 points in a head-to-head matchup views Republicans roughly the same amount that they view Democrats. And what we know about young voters is they typically skew towards the left. Now, standard convention would tell us, well, if that's the case, that certainly means the Democrats are losing the young voter. Democrats aren't doing so good amongst young voters, but they're winning them by more than what we saw in terms of estimations for Kamala Harris after the election. Anywhere from a plus 15 to plus 20 margin is turning into a baseline plus 21 for Democrats in a poll that shows them less well performing than they did 8 years ago, with room to grow. 17% of these voters, 18 to 29, are undecided. Other age groups too, especially minority voters, Hispanic voters, reverting back in favor of the Democratic Party. White voters at the lowest point for the GOP they've seen in a while. Black voters reverting back in favor of the Democratic Party. Of those who voted in 2024 that plan to vote in 2026, remember, that is the electorate that chose Trump by 1.5, is choosing Democrats by 6. This is not out of the ordinary from Trump's first midterm. The same thing happened. You don't win a national popular vote as Democrats in 2018 by 9 points unless you win over some disaffected Republican voters that went back to Trump, sure, in 2020, but wanted to send him a message in 2018, or in some cases, never went back to the GOP. That's why Joe Biden had such a broad and wide-ranged coalition that was, in fact, bringing in a lot of those voters that might have went back to Trump in 2024, not voted for Harris in 2024, but voted for Biden in 2020 and ushered in this Democratic victory in 2018, and could likely usher in a Democratic victory in 2026. So seeing it here, seeing Democrats, Republicans, independents, yeah, obviously, they're pissed off at the Democratic Party. A lot of Democrats are. I read the comments section. I see the base of those who I think identify as Democrats on this channel. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you'll find it. A lot of critiques, a lot of anger and animosity for a political party that many voters have felt has let them down. are looking to the next cycle for something to be fixed. And while they may be discontent with whoever it might be, that in whoever's eyes represents the Democratic apparatus, it doesn't make them less likely to vote for Democrats down the ballot. And that will be the biggest lesson for the Republican Party. That Fox News and Breitbart and whoever else can parrot the same talking points that Republicans are more popular than Democrats and therefore must win the election. Newsflash, that's not how American politics works. If it did, Kamala Harris today would be president because approval isn't everything. Approval means something to a degree. But when your own base is turning on you and your own base is fired up and ready to vote, they're turning on you because they don't like what the National Party is doing, but it doesn't mean they're voting Republican. It doesn't mean they're voting against their own base. Because what we saw in 2016 was a great example. In terms of favorability for Donald Trump in the 2016 election, about 30% of Republicans to 40%, depending on the poll, said they disapproved of Donald Trump as a candidate. And Democrats thought that meant there would be massive reversions in support in these key battleground states and non-battleground states. But there wasn't. And there weren't. Because voters, believe it or not, can disapprove of the candidate that they will eventually vote for. And that is how Donald Trump won the election. And that is why Democrats will win this election. Because I think we're missing the mark here. And when you miss the mark, and I will admit, there have been times I have missed the mark. I'm human, right? I take this in and you learn from it. That's what has been learned. And I'm surprised the Republican Party that has benefited from this type of dynamic in American politics can't see it on the other end. Because they're so fearful of a loss, they're writing it off as an impossibility, to some degree believing that that's how elections are won. But not recognizing the very real reality that a political party can be underwater and worse off in favorability than their opposition, and yet still win if voters are upset with the incumbent party, and it's the voters in the middle that are more upset than not. And it is the same voters here, independents who are in the middle, that say, I don't love the Democratic Party, certainly don't, but I will vote for them against the Republicans. And it is that how midterms are won, and it is those elections that really drive the reality in Washington, D.C. and across the country. So we'll see. The YouGov poll, among many, is telling us everything we've known. While Democrats being unpopular in January still had Republicans up through February and through the early days of March up until the final end, we have now started to see Democrats improve, and it is only getting better. And we'll see over the next few weeks and months how this changes. But for now, the Democratic Party stands to be the most unpopular political party right now, but yet the most likely to regain control of Congress in the 2026 midterm elections. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video for you to watch, and then a playlist for my 2026 House election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.